In German, the word Schloss means a palace and also a lock. In English, the word belonging means a condition of affinity, a secure relationship to a person, place, or thing. It also means possessions, as in these are your belongings, my belongings, our belongings. In 2002, I began living in Berlin and writing my first novel based on my ancestors who moved across the world in the 20th century, propelled by the forces of empire. They went from India to Kenya to Britain, their lives shaped by British colonialism, as well as the counter-struggles for independence and redress. In 2002, the German parliament voted in favor of rebuilding a palace from the Prussian era and the Kaiserreich, periods synonymous with militarism and colonialism. Back then, I did not know that I would eventually settle down in Berlin. I did not know I would become a German citizen. I did not know that over the coming years, the sense of what it means to be German, in Europe, in the world, and understanding necessarily always in flux, would start to shift dramatically, even shake. I did not know that the very idea of who counts as a citizen, who can belong, would be brazenly contested as illiberal currents, nationalistic, racist, misogynistic, swelled in Germany and across the globe. Some knew. From the start, many parts of civil society, from activists to academia, resisted the building of the Berlin Palace. Their critique catalyzed a long overdue public debate about Germany's pre-Nazi colonial past and how it affects present ideas of belonging. All the while, buildings emblematic of a drive to distort history are being reconstructed or planned in other cities. The new Old Town in Frankfurt am Main, the Frauenkirche in Dresden, the Garrison Church in Potsdam. Such neo-national architecture has enthusiastic backers amongst the far right, people locked into a fantasy of white supremacy. The reconstructions also have support among some conservatives and moderates, people who have perhaps not quite understood what such developments really mean. The Berlin Palace is only the most conspicuous example of a reactionary trend, but it is the most problematic because of its planned function, to house violently looted or dubiously obtained ethnological objects and simultaneously develop a decolonizing approach to itself, its holdings, and its workings with others. The central question: can a lock also be a key? Wait. Perhaps we should no longer refer to ethnological objects, but rather to belongings. It moves us away from the tidy abstraction of objects, which implies a blankness on which anyone can project, objectify. Belongings, on the other hand, intricately, inextricably ties up notions of possession, being, and longing. In December 2018, 2 years after the UK voted to leave the EU, I entered a small ground-floor room in the district office for Mitte, Berlin. Also there were my husband and the civil servant who had overseen my citizenship application and checked that I had passed my citizenship test. I signed a few final documents and then stood to pledge. I solemnly declare that I will respect the Constitution and the laws of the Federal Republic of Germany and will refrain from doing anything that could harm them. I can't believe I've got this, I said, clutching my citizenship certificate as we left. With that, you get responsibility for the Holocaust too, my husband said. He went on talking. I didn't hear a thing. I was thinking he could have waited a bit longer before making that observation. At the same time, I was feeling an awful weight. The past had acquired a different charge. A history I had studied as a guest of sorts had become mine to host. If there is one advantage of the British triumphalist obsession with World War II, it's that the Holocaust features prominently, and therefore, right from my school days, this crime had assumed a pivotal place in my sense of the past and present. Still, the heft of the knowledge had suddenly changed. Germany's memorial culture after the Holocaust initially appeared to me to cohere around the notion wieder gut machen, to make good again, through reparation, restitution, remorseful remembrance. This approach seemed exemplary to me. It was in Berlin, a city full of memorials to victims of Nazi tyranny, that I began to wonder about the nature of public memory in general, but especially in Britain. For years, I walked over Stolpersteine, commemorative stumbling stones set into cobbled streets, in this country, and thought about the other country, Britain, to which I belonged by dint of chance. My birth there, my British passport, and all the associated opportunities were mine, only because others had suffered, resisted, paid, and died as colonial subjects. I thought of that other country where there is not a single compulsory school class, let alone a memorial acknowledging the crimes of its vast, cruel empire. I was grateful for the contrast Germany offered, for what it revealed to me, but it's also painful to realize you have been cheated by your country, told a false or incomplete history, and also painful to see that you were foolish enough to fall for it. Wary of being caught out again, I paid particular attention to critiques of Germany's memory culture, to flaws in the Wiedergutmachen premise, to those who said some things could never be made good again, those who said some methods of remembrance seemed designed more to assuage German guilt than respond to the actual needs and wishes of a diverse Jewish community. I paid attention to how the memorial landscape gradually extended to include Roma and Sinti, homosexual victims, and those killed in the euthanasia program of the Third Reich. I paid attention to the commemoration of German reunification, noting how the joining of East and West was reified in various ways, even as cultural traces of the East were erased. I paid attention to the crimes of Germany's pre-Nazi colonial past, which were less salient in the public consciousness, less significant on the political agenda, less worthy, so far, of memorials. The genocide, from 1904 to 1908, of around 100,000 Herero and Namar peoples in Namibia, the approximately 250,000 victims of German atrocities in Tanzania, including those who died in the Maji Maji War to oust German colonial forces. There had been no questions related to these latter events in my citizenship test. Yet it seemed to me there was still much to value in the German approach, which had locked a commitment to remembering the Holocaust to the very core of social, political, and cultural life. This has been key to some of the better aspects of Germany. Memory is one of the few things in the world that can be both lock and key. Even if the lock sometimes jammed, stuck fast, kept important things out, I still believed that Germany's practice with this mechanism for holding on to awful lessons from its Nazi past would be a key to opening up ways to deal with its earlier colonial history, key to opening up other ways of relating to the world, to each other. And then came the Berlin Palace. In 2020, across the world, anti-racist movements bring down colonial statues, altering the face of cities, challenging authority. And Germany opens its biggest cultural project of the 21st century, a reconstructed imperial palace in the heart of the capital, soon to be partly filled with the ill-gotten belongings of communities all over the world. How could this come to pass? What kind of remembrance culture is this? The palace stands on center stage like a bodybuilder, holding that pose known in the sport as most muscular, legs spread, arms raised, everything flexed, not least the sinuous facades, which were recreated almost to the last detail and paid for with private donations to the tune of 100 million euros. An advert for how class and money can influence the character of public space in democratic Germany even in the 21st century. An advert for a very modern form of feudalism that can co-opt at least 560 million euros of state funds into serving private minority interests as well as the interests of the ill-informed. The Berlin Palace project was initiated by an association comprised of people who were, presumably, steeped in Germany's memory culture, yet nevertheless managed to hold by and try to recreate an idealized version of its imperial past. Until summer 2020, I had seen the bodybuilder only from a distance, glimpsed the east facade, less grotesquely sinuous, but equally ominous for its fascist architectural echoes. I had held back from going there, as one intuitively tries to avoid danger. What the threat was, I could not quite articulate then. Now I know it was the fear of having to reconsider, once more, a history I had for the most part accepted. The fear of having to face up to my failure once again, to grasp the scale of its incompleteness. In Germany, I fell for an idea that was not true, never can be, the society that knows how to remember. Rebuilding the Berlin Palace, renaming it the Humboldt Forum, and then attempting to undo what the palace is from within the place itself, strike me as flawed signs of the Wiedergutmachen mentality. And yet, even now, is this misguided? I do not believe the possibility of making good again should be discarded, just better interrogated. Key in this regard are the allies we choose, the methods we use. I myself now try to practice what Priyamvada Gopal, in line with many other post-colonial theorists, calls a sustained unlearning. For me, this means being alert to harmful patterns in my own thoughts and actions. It means listening, staying open, being vulnerable, able to change course, to admit error. Donna Haraway sums it up well. Decolonizing requires a kind of radical not knowing, emptying out, a kind of truly not knowing, so as to somehow be less stupid. The first time I went within the palace walls, I felt the force field of coloniality, its distorting effect. I saw how some of the newly commissioned artworks were already misshapen, like the sculpture of large letters circling the walls of one room, spelling out the names of all the architects who had been responsible for erecting something on the site over the centuries. Why, I wondered, why in this macho building would you have more men's names blown up and paraded? Or was that the point? An accusation to emphasize the long line of male dominance? If so, it seemed to me an attempt to mend that only reproduced an ugly trope. I wished for a line of graffiti sprayed roughly in red. Where were all the women? I wished for meticulous carvings in every wall, marking the names of all those who had been exploited or killed to make palaces like this one possible. At the same time, I was aware it might add insult to injury to have such names here. A monument can't be turned into a memorial with mere gestures, especially not when its walls are already inscribed with the names of the biggest private donors to its cause. Questions rang through the empty halls. Whose names do we venerate? Whose memory do we honor? Whose lives matter? And the other eternal dilemma, how to engage on these issues without repeating in other ways the violence that has already been done, how to try and repair without inadvertently harming again. After that visit, I stopped asking myself, how could this happen? Suddenly, it was perfectly clear. This is a very truthful building, a perfect example of a certain kind of dominance, white, mostly male, that continues very successfully to reproduce itself. The Berlin Palace expresses that dominance in its most confident, entitled form. The building is a monumental homage to coloniality. The diffuse architecture of coloniality is everywhere. That is to say, our relations to each other continue to be constructed within social, racial, political, juridical, and economic realities deformed by the legacies of European colonialism. The Berlin Palace is coloniality distilled and set in stone, a stone you don't just stumble over, but crash into. The architecture is disturbing enough, but then there are the collections, thousands upon thousands of belongings, with as many stories, deaths, traumas, ruptures, questions. Holding on to such belongings, most of which are the possessions of others from around the world, must now mean holding yourself accountable to the world. The palace has locked Germany into a very public reckoning with its colonial past. The strangest thing for me is that on this perilous site all my histories collide. On the ground of the monument, I understood better the nature of the weight that had settled in me the day I became a German citizen, and which I had been carrying around ever since. It was the weight of wondering how to hold together all the different histories that were now mine, without needing to choose between them or have a hierarchy. The Humboldt Forum unsettles all sense of place, all sense of time, forces a repositioning of self within entangled histories that stretch in all directions from the belongings held there. It compels us to acknowledge multiple affinities, dependencies, loyalties, duties, and obliges us to search together for ways of negotiating these. Many of the belongings in Germany's museums have lain for years in archives, untouched, unseen, unvalued, and still there is reluctance to relinquish them. The excuse of obscure provenance is no reason not to try and know. Anything else is just a case of what Ariella Aisha Azoulay calls imperial retentiveness, the ability to retain the outcome of imperial violence as fact, as what is, what one is, and what one has. Wait. Can we really speak of ethnological museums? Might it not be more accurate to say ethno-illogical museums for places that have long propagated racist classifications and hierarchies, turned stolen cultural artifacts into tools for enforcing white domination? The only option, as more experts in the field are now advocating, is complete restitution of the belongings wanted back by their owners. And lest we think this is a radical, enlightened position, Azoulay reminds us that it is neither a progressive idea nor the most advanced phase of our democracies, so much so that centuries were supposedly required to reach such a point. A palace is about defensiveness as well as display. Palaces kept most people out, held their treasures close, yet at the same time showed off to all. This duality pervades the Humboldt Forum, which displays readiness to decolonize and at the same time defends its collections simply through continuing to display them, even if this is supposed to be done in a more reflected, self-critical way. There's a version of such dualities in me too, in many of us, I guess. I want to display my willingness to question, to change in the face of these challenges. Yet even as I do, defensiveness crowds my thoughts, nostalgia for things from which I have benefited, anxiety about what may be lost. Yet, the ebbing hesitation of someone once enchanted by what turned out to be criminal elements in what I took for your, my, our world culture, sits alongside the growing urgency of someone who accepts it is time to unlearn. Part of what defines public spaces like the Humboldt Forum are the longings of the society to whom, as a state institution, it is ultimately beholden. Like it or not, those of us who live in Germany are locked into the fate of this place. It is a kind of citizenship test that shatters the national frame in which we tend to understand the term citizen. It rattles assumptions about rights and responsibilities. What does it mean to possess rights that are dependent on the dispossession of others? Far from healing a wound at the center of the city, as initiators of the palace reconstruction project claim, this edifice brings into stark relief the extent of an injury that stretches from the palace at Schlossplatz to the Holocaust Memorial at Cora Berliner Straße 1 to Wilhelmstraße 92, the site of the former Reich Chancellery, where the Berlin Conference took place in 1884 to 85. There, major European powers, including Britain, France, Belgium, Portugal, and Germany, negotiated and formalized claims to territory in Africa. They went on to expand their claims on the continent, and by 1900, European states had stakes on nearly 90% of it. The Berlin Conference was the decisive inaugural blast in what Dan Hicks calls World War Zero. The period from 1884 to 1914, when the European colonial powers brutally subjugated African peoples, exploiting and killing them, stealing wholesale their resources and treasures. Today, at Wilhelmstrasse 92, there is a single modest memorial plate describing the outcome of the conference. The wound is raw, gaping, weeping. So, what made me enter the palace knowing all this? I required some reason, something I could hold onto like a rope, tug, tie to other knowledges and experiences. In spring 2020, I was invited to conceptualize and curate a project that would involve bringing together writers and belongings from the collections to see what kind of narrations could emerge. I felt cautious, but also curious, because it seemed to me that this could offer a chance to challenge the traditional master narrative of the museum, to disrupt the hubristic script that said, everything should stay here, for the sake of the world, of course, since we are the most qualified locksmiths. Maybe there's also a presumption in thinking you can step into the machinery of power and change anything. If so, it is a necessary presumption, because power never budges of its own accord.
No justice! No peace! 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 No justice! No peace!
I imagine a new question on the citizenship test with its standard 4 multiple-choice answers from which I must pick one. As a citizen faced with the Humboldt Forum, what are your options? 1. Visit and enjoy. 2. Boycott. 3. Inner migration. 4. Ask questions. And more questions. Keep asking, even if it hurts. I could tick 3 of those and justify them elaborately, but I pick number 4. Those who started working in the Humboldt Forum, planning the future program while the building was still being completed, had to wear hard hats to enter and move around. I too donned a bright blue one when I went. Walking through the space confirmed what I had intuited from a distance and stated in my concept proposal. The physical building of the Humboldt Forum may almost be ready. One day soon, it may even appear complete. But in truth, this place could never be finished. The rebuilding of knowledges, of relationships, of understanding, of repair, to name just a few aspects, all remain perpetually under construction. And the developments, internal and external, had to remain transparent, legible. Narratives are made from processes. Every step is part of the story. All processes are imperfect, but if they can be read, they can be improved. I suggested artistic documentation of process as a central part of the project concept I submitted, a means to record achievements, discoveries, misunderstandings, and failings from all sides, my own included. That is the true nature of a test, after all, isn't it? To reveal both how much you know and don't know, and, perhaps most importantly, to reveal what you are prepared to do with that knowledge. Still, no matter the methods you use, the allies you choose, always, always with such an institution, the concerns remain, the rumblings of conscience, the warnings of allies. Consorting with the enemy, tainted by association, compromised, naive, deluded. I hesitate. I want to retreat, to wait until I've unlearned more, until I've learned enough, which means waiting forever. Inner migration is not an effective tool for political insurgency. Boycott can be powerful. My own criticality is sharpened by those who abstain from anything to do with the palace. I can step away from the Humboldt Forum, but I can't step out of the world. The dilemmas don't go away just because I keep a distance from one version of them. Moreover, I cannot be indifferent to the fact that there are others, amongst them initiators of the palace reconstruction and some members of their circle of friends, who don't wait, who never hesitate to claim space, to impose their narrative. What I can do is act to contribute to a broader effort for change, an anti-colonial effort that has been unfolding through all time and which, in our time, expresses itself in many different modes and assemblies. As I removed my hard hat after the first encounter with the palace, I thought it might be an idea to hold on to the hats, offer them to visitors as a symbolic shield against the coloniality that ambushed from every corner. And then I thought, how pathetic if this was the only protection I could propose against the threat and insult and aggression in those walls. Was there anything you could effectively set against this building? I said aloud. The program, an ally replied, a dynamic, exploratory, forensic, collaborative, questioning, restituting, transnational program. There are moments when I wonder if a forum in a palace might constitute some kind of Occupy movement, a group of clandestine political iconoclasts, metaphorically pulling down statues, literally returning belongings. I picture the bodybuilder with knees shaking, arms trembling, on the verge of collapse as these counterforces weigh it down. It remains to be seen if a forum can offer a meaningful passageway from what should not have come to pass. The palace, packed with your, my, our belongings, is there. If we are to break this colonial lock, many, many more of us need to find, make, and share keys.